And we are live. Hello, Reece.
Hello. Thanks for
How
having me.
how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. How have you been?
Um, Ups and downs. It's been
Yeah.
it's been a complicated year. I think not only for
Yeah.
me, but like for a lot of people. And 2025 is shaping to be also kind of like challenging. So we'll see. I will say I'm doing okay
Yeah.
for now. I'm doing okay. Um,
Yes.
so first question I ask every guest um is who is Reese Barker? And when I ask that question, don't give me your title. Don't talk about work. Like everybody
Uh-huh.
knows what you do. They know your style.
Sure.
So I'm not here for that. I'm here to
Sure.
get to know the person behind the persona. So who
Sure.
is Reese Barker?
Yeah. Just off of the top here, I'm basically kind of your maybe even stereotypical kind of suburban raised, creatively motivated person. So I come from like a normal suburban background. My dad worked at Boeing. He commuted every day, and I was just sort of like a family, four kids, and I was kind of the creative one, but we all sort of were creative in our own ways. And I just hated anything that didn't have to do with drawing or dancing or skateboarding or painting. And I found myself um, trying kind of in every like path or vine, exploring every one of those as I was growing up, and sort of always coming back to kind of illustrating as my base. But I used to do goofy edited YouTube videos as a kid, and I sold grip tape. I would paint grip tape, which stuff you put on top of skateboard. You know that, knowing you have skateboards hanging up. I would sell those to locals, and like people knew me for my skating and my painted grip. Like it was a whole, I was really serious into skateboarding for like a long time. I took it seriously. I tried to go professional, but just couldn't find my footing there. I competed. I was at the barracks multiple times for competitions. I don't know if you know of the barracks. And then I kind of ended up here, but it was always like odd jobs. I hated odd jobs. I hated school. And I didn't pursue any of those things seriously until kind of I rolled into finding motion design, which like lit a fire internally. And then I really ultra focused on teaching myself that, and which sort of led me here. I'm also a dad. I have three kids and a wife, and I'm a family man. I don't know. That's kind of all encompassing, but also very rambling.
No, it's interesting. I'm puzzled why did you use the word stereotypical? Because
I
I mean,
okay,
you
yeah.
have you have your very. I mean, I don't know in which angle you framed that, but you have you have developed your own brand in a way, your style, and I don't find it stereotypical. So that's why I'm puzzled. Why did you use that word?
I guess I just like maybe where I've ended up is more unique and ownable, but where I started, I think is typical and a dime a dozen. Like I think that you could find like a lot of kids that would say this was their leaning in life. They were creatively motivated, but they just didn't end up somewhere where that came to fruition in the same way that I've been able to do. And so I think in that way, it is stereotypical and not necessarily very unique. But I don't say that as a bad thing. I just say that as like, I don't know that I was necessarily special, but all that I do know is that I was committed ultimately to creativity, and I had been like I was born, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, from what you say, like it makes me think. That is, I mean, I guess most of us creatives, it's something that comes like that gets ignited at a certain age, and of course, depending on which generation you are, you were
Yeah.
triggered by certain things. Um, like I remember, like you mentioned skateboarding. So when I started skateboarding, it wasn't yet trending. Like the X
Yeah.
Games didn't exist it. And so if you were walking on the streets, at least in South America, with a skateboard, like people would like ladies would like hold their purse, like
Yeah.
this guy is shady. And then like suddenly MTV rolled out through cable and
Yeah.
started screening the X Games, and then you had like every kid out there had a skateboard. Like,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
course, there were different levels of those more committed to really skateboarding and those that like
Right.
wanted one for Christmas. I don't know. Um,
Right.
but
Right.
I think what you mentioned is like, yeah, I mean, sort of the codes you mentioned. I also was like, I was also like called by that, like
Yeah.
skateboarding and like the art influence into skateboarding, like the style of
Right.
graphics and stuff like that, that wasn't really haven't been seen before, or at least
Yeah.
not in the mainstream. Um,
Yeah.
which brings me to the topic of today. So it's fun. It's always funny in these conversations through the podcast because generally when the person answers this first question, it's already tying in with the question I'm going to ask
Sure.
next, which is the
That's
topic,
cool.
because I select the topic for specific persons. Like this is not
Yeah.
random.
Yes.
And so the topic of today is the illusion of being relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Interesting.
and the reason I chose that topic for you, it's twofold. Is the first one is I was talking with somebody else on a private conversation about like our careers and how long we've been doing this, and the fact of like having to renew yourself constantly because
Sure.
trends change, tools change, and it can be sometimes daunting to staying relevant in a way. But that word means many things.
Yeah.
And then I remembered something you said a while ago, um, where you said that the art form you were like practicing it and using to do your day-to-day work is nowadays considered dead almost. It's like it's not like trendy. It's not like 3D shiny unreal stuff. It's more
Yeah.
like traditional animation,
Yeah.
um which to me connected perfectly with this illusion of being relevant and this like kind of like FOMO of like being up to date with what's happening, when in fact,
Sure.
um maybe that's not what you need to stay relevant in a way. um so
Right.
what like to you staying relevant means?
Ah, interesting. Um, I think it's difficult to define confidently. Um, and it's so much of it, I think relevance, so much of relevance is colored by social media and our ability to get exposure and to be seen. Um, and as that becomes more and more pervasive in our lives as creatives, but also just generally as like the Earth's population, I mean, it's so wide ranging now. Um, it can be difficult to see beyond that lens. Um, and I think what honestly what kind of burns through maybe all of that noise, because that's so ambiguous and it's also not controlled by us. We try and we can like bend our knees to the demands of socials and algorithms and changing formulas, and there's no guarantee of success there. There's no guarantee of exposure there. But what there is like love your work, put it out if you feel it's necessary to put it out, and just be consistent in that because you love it. And I think the intention behind that uh, gains like more of a true exposure or builds more value rather than pivoting to every trend. And I've done both of these things, to be honest with you. I've like tried trends more earnestly, and some of them find more success and some of them don't. And I've also just gone like, well, I love this and I know it won't do well on social, but I was happy with it. And both of these things might have pros and cons, to be honest with you, but I think this other side where you're just loving the work is the one that, like, the return on that investment is like, well, through the grapevine, somebody saw somebody that talked to somebody at somewhere, and then that ended up in a project. And it wasn't because it was viral. Obviously there's opportunity from virality in a different angle, but I think the consistent loving the work, whether you're posting it or not, maybe it's just updating your social or your website, or it's whatever, right? I think that has more long-term and lasting kind of exposure or relevance than maybe shooting for constant virality, which is unpredictable and unattainable and seems to only happen to whoever's willing to play the game the most. I don't know. How does that sit with you? Yeah, let me hear how
No,
you're
no,
feeling.
no, no. I was listening to you because like yeah, I was gonna say I have you in my socials, so I can see that you're pretty active in
Yeah,
them, you know,
yeah,
and I'm not here judging that at all. It's like
right.
everybody's playing that game nowadays because to me
Yes,
it's like
yes,
it's like the snake that bites itself. Is
yes,
like as much as you want to hone the other side you were mentioning, that like loving the work and the craft and doing your thing and just
yeah,
pushing that forward. If you don't push that forward through socials, probably
right.
nobody's going to know about you. So it's like a double-edged sword in a way,
I
and when i
think
was
so.
uh, when I was asking what being relevant means to you, it's not try to maybe not only focus on that aspect, because like I said,
Right,
being relevant means many things.
right.
um for somebody, being relevant means like uh I don't know, like taking care of his family, like.
Mm,
For somebody else, it might be excellence,
mm-hmm,
being at the top of their game constantly.
mm-hmm,
For some other people, it might be I want to be visible online,
mm-hmm,
you know.
mm-hmm.
And in the end, I think you kind of like touched on it. In the current like status of the world,
Right,
like all of
right.
that gets mixed up and
Yes.
gets interconnected, and it becomes this like mush of things where it becomes really hard to distinguish what is what anymore, in a way.
Yeah, interesting. Mm-hmm. So I guess there's two schools of thought. Well, there's probably many more than that, but I addressed it from like a current relevance. But what maybe establishes lasting relevance or more personal relevance or like a deeper, more thoughtful version of relevance? And I think that maybe it circles back to a similar like underlying foundation, which is that I would like and appreciate if people came back to my work and uh, watched it or remembered it in a way that outlasts its commercial viability, right? So if a piece can live beyond its runtime in its paid ad space or whatever, because other artists are looking for inspiration or got some inspiration out of it, I think that establishes also an underlying current of relevance that has nothing to do with whether you're on socials or not. And I think that like a Buck or whomever, Oddfellows in your favorite studios, like they're not necessarily your favorite content creators on social. They almost kind of are in a different lane entirely, but you always remember them or come back to them, or at least I'm speaking personally, because there's a level of work and a standard of execution that you can trust, that's going to be consistent. And there's inspiration that you can kind of constantly pull from that. And if my work can exist in a similar lane, that means like my love that I'm pouring into it is sustaining value um, beyond like surface level. I don't know. That's just where my head went when you
No, no,
think of
no,
it in
no.
a different way.
It's interesting because, in a certain way, it's a certain form of relevance. Because,
Right.
despite the fact that you said, like you said, you produced this for this client at this moment, you were paid for
Right.
it, and it was used for a campaign, whatever. Um, Afterwards, that piece, for its craft and the way you created it, uh, stays relevant for somebody. Um, and that brings me like something to my memory that we discussed with Erin Sorofsky from Sorofsky Studios, where she was saying, like, for her, she makes a distinction. Like, on one side, there's artists, and on the other side, there's designers. And she says like, an artist like makes art for himself, and then maybe he expects or tries to sell it to somebody. A designer solves problems. Like, he like, here's a problem, he solves it, and then he moves to another problem.
Right.
And for her, she was like, saying, she told me, I asked her, like, what are you? She went, I'm a designer, 100%. Like, I'm not there to like create something for myself. Like, I want to solve things. But the thing you're saying leaves kind of in the middle to me,
Yeah.
because in a way, you're being hired to solve a problem. You have to communicate about this thing for this client, so that's a problem that needs a solution, and you're bringing your artistic approach to solve it. But in the end, you would like that to live further and like outlive that thing, so it becomes more artful in a way.
Right.
And
Right.
but I understand your dilemma, because I kind of live in the same like middle point, where suddenly I'm hired for something, and I listen to the client, I read the briefs, I try to answer the client's demands the best I can, but at the same time, I'm trying to craft something beautiful, and I'm trying to enjoy the time I spend crafting that thing. And I also expect that, despite the fact that this is a campaign for blah blah blah, afterwards that thing will remain present. Despite the crazy flux of content and videos and art pieces that are flooding us every day.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting distinction, and I tend to agree with it. Listen, for me, I got into this because of the art side of it. And this is going to sound silly, but just an anecdote from my early career. I didn't even I was so creatively motivated that I didn't even fully recognize my first year into it, let's say, what I was making. I didn't understand, no, these can be distilled down to you're just delivering commercials that nobody cares about. And I think I had a family member or somebody say it to me that bluntly, well, it's just commercials or something. And I was like, no, it's not. I got defensive emotionally because I didn't get it. I was so green and so naive and so no, I'm making art, that I really hadn't come to terms yet that well, this might be art in a form that is less appreciated or isn't even really accepted on that level. And I only say that to bring yeah, to speak to that differentiation between artist and designer. And I think the purest of artists make art as expression only, and the result or the client or whatever is like completely irrelevant. And then the designer, I think, yeah, is a problem solver, which is true. And I do strive now in my career after learning to be a professional. I certainly didn't start that way. I learned to become that after having worked and grinded and seeking further understanding. How do I help clients? You become more of a designer. But my initial seed and flame was completely art, and just motivated by art and expression. So I do strive for that balance, and I couldn't tell you. It might be different every client, right? On this client, I'm more designer, less artist. On this client, I'm more artist, less designer, because they're giving me freedom and they trust my
Yeah.
voice. And so being able to play with that and adjust those settings, I think, is also valuable.
Yeah, no, I like 100% agree with you that depending on the client, on the project, you are more one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Like exactly like you said, like some clients or agencies sometimes are so specific on some aspects that
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna say you become like a monkey that only pushes buttons, but
Mm-hmm.
you become like like you're just executing sort of
Mm-hmm.
like what you're being giving, and
Yes.
you just have the technical abilities to solve that
Mm-hmm.
problem in a way.
Absolutely.
And in others, like you are given the chance to express yourself, like to
Mm-hmm.
express your vision on how this should be communicated, or how you would convey the emotions that this like brings into you to like
Yeah.
put that out into the world. Um,
Absolutely.
and speaking of like weird spots to be standing in, um, when I check your profile on your website, if I read kind of like the let's call it services you offer to clients, you could be qualified as a generalist in a way,
Yeah.
I would say,
Yep.
because there's branding, there's logos, there's websites, there's like motion. So it's kind of like a lot of everything, you know?
Yep.
And this other person with whom I was having this conversation, because I identify myself also as a generalist, and he also identifies himself as a generalist. And the conversation we were having is that today, being a journalist is kind of like a weird, awkward spot to be standing in, where kind of like a lot of people is asking you to be. I mean, everybody's trying to put you in a box.
Mhm.
It's oh, you are an animator. Oh, you are
Yes.
a 3D modeler.
Yeah.
Oh, you are a lighter shader artist. Oh, you do Unreal. Like it's very hard for people to grasp um, the fact that you can be passionate about like many things,
Yes.
and that you can excel at those many things.
Yes.
Um, and so I was curious to see how you've been navigating that generalist ship these days.
Yeah. Um, I I I don't know that I necessarily identify with either label, and I tend to find that labels, while they can be helpful for organizing where we all fall, they tend to fall short. Um, but I agree that my services describe a general, like it's more of a generalist uh, list of services rather than I specifically do this thing only. It just so happens that if you hire me for one of those things, I'm going to do them really, really well. And I'm going to be really, really thoughtful about them. Um, and I'm going to outpace maybe competitors because I care about it that much more. And I find that for me, it's more about having a voice and executing that voice across wherever the client might need it. So, for example, earlier in my career, I was, I guess, typecast as an animator because that's the work I was showing, and I was competent in that. But that didn't feel true to me and who I was because I grew up drawing pencil and paper, like years and years and years of intensive illustration. And so eventually I felt trapped in how I was being recognized on the marketplace. And so I pushed myself to put out more illustration work. Now, it wasn't like pencil portraiture, like graphite portraits, which I used to do. It was more like, let me illustrate in the way that it's accepted in this kind of bubble of motion design. So I pushed my style and things to kind of work in that sphere. And then, like, didn't take very long before I started getting illustration jobs. And then now I could ask 10 people how they define me, and I'd get a different answer with all those 10 people. 2 of them would say director. 3 of them would say you're an illustrator. Another 3 would say you're an animator. One of them might say you do great design work. You could do interior design or site design, or you could do my logo. And so I go like, yes, I can do all of these things. It takes a little bit of a shift in your brain, but generally speaking, they go, we want Reece to do it in a Reece way. If I find that I'm impersonating a different designer, I wouldn't take that job. So, for example, this last December, I had an indie game studio reach out, and they were like, we want you to rebrand us. We need a website, and we need a logo, and we need brand guides, etc. And I was like, I did my own website with a developer. I did my own logo and my own branding, and I've done smaller little logos up until this point, but never to the extent that I would offering that service necessarily. But it felt like an interesting way. I was like, I'll do it, but I'll do it as Reece, and here's what that means. And they said, that's exactly why we came to you. So they were okay and comfortable with like my voice extending into these services. And it was super successful. I delivered that project. I partnered with a development that built the site from the ground up, but I designed it first. I did the logo, and it's like kind of leans hand drawn and cool in that way. And like they were really, really happy. So I get it. It's a lot of services, but generally, if they're not allowing me to be me, meaning my voice is extended, then I will turn the project away. And that's not just for like sites or logos, even for animation. Like if it's like, we want you to act as Vuco, the motion branding studio, I'd probably say no. Like, thank you for considering me, but that's not necessarily
Yeah,
my
just call
strength.
them. Just call them.
Yes.
Then. You know, if you
Call
want to,
that.
if
That's
you want
right.
Vuko, then call them. It's like
That's right. That's right. I want to be Reece, and I think that my portfolio shows a voice, even if there's lots of different services. And luckily, clients for the most part have understood that.
and how you know there's like your identity, but like how did you came to? Let's say a client came to you for animation and illustration, and you end up like doing a logo. How that happens? You know, like how that presented to yourself. I'm just asking you those questions, not specifically for me, but also because there might be people that will listen to the podcast later on. And what's been interesting about the podcast is like there's people reaching me out, like asking me questions so I can ask those to the people I have these recordings, because of course it's different for everybody.
Right.
And I think like everybody's trying to get the needle in the haystack right now. And so I'm just curious for you, how did you manage to kind of like diversify in a way that the client didn't felt like, oh, this doesn't fit or this feels wrong?
I've been really proactive in making sure that I'm defending myself and I'm taking ownership over the parts of the project that I did own. So even when I joined teams as a hired hand early in my career, it's like I recognized early that I was having a larger creative influence than was going to be credited to me. And I had to defend myself and go, no, I art directed this. You didn't pay me an art director rate, but that's what I did. That was my influence on this project, and I'm standing by it. And that's important as a solopreneur or solo creative. We defend ourselves. Other people don't necessarily like, they can be supportive of us, but it's our job to like defend ourselves. And I think it was a series of consistently like making sure I was understanding my role intimately and then presenting it as such. And over a long period of time, that starts to change the curve of how you are accepted in the marketplace. So, like, if I'm illustrating and animating, but there's a title page, well, there's an opportunity on that title page to do a custom like word mark for the project. And that's an extra detail, but I would always, when I was allowed, I would always attack that part of it because I don't see it as a separate element that a designer needs to tackle. I see it as like tied directly to the rest of the art direction. And so in that way, I'm executing on it with the same philosophy that I'm illustrating a detailed like composition. I'm putting those things and those details into the design of the title. Time Lord, which I did with Battle Axe, it's a tool for like, I did that title and drew that font and like made sure it felt right. And that's how I know it felt right for the piece. But it's also, that's title design. That's in a way a logo. So it's just
Yeah.
continuing that. And then like all of a sudden, it kind of morphed into it. I don't think it's a clear path. It is not linear. No way. It absolutely isn't linear. It's very like this. What I would say to be careful about is like, do your best work along the way, because there's a lot of pitfalls and like edges off of the cliff here. If you're too wide too quickly and none of it's any good, you're not only not going to get hired for one thing, you're not going to get hired for any of the others either. I'm only allowed to be where I'm at now because I was so precious about the smaller amount of services I was doing early on, and I cared deeply. And then that is what allowed me to expand eventually. But it wasn't a jump in the gate and do everything and suck at everything right away. We have to earn. It's this
No, for
common
sure.
thing in motion design, especially, students want to jump in and call themselves creative directors because we're sort of allowed to just give ourselves our own titles. And I probably fell victim to this early on, but I also remember recognizing early on, like, actually, this is not what I am, and I don't truly have the experience here to suggest that. And so it's probably hurting me more than it would be helping me. So I think it's a similar sort of mindset.
You know that what you just like said, it like brings me a couple of memories, and one of them is, like you said, it's just try always to do the best you can in the work you're doing, um, even if that's not like the task you've been like primarily assigned. Like I clearly remember a project where I was brought in as an animator, and I was animating stuff produced by a group of illustrators, and there was an art director on top, and
Mm-hmm.
and so and it was like a pretty large project, and so as soon as I started like working in the project, I'm very organized in with my work, and
Mm-hmm.
I immediately start to see like kind of like the chaos. Like not everybody's following the same guidelines. Not everybody is animating with the same codes, and I mean, like everything was kind of like scattered all over the place, which made everything look like a patchwork, despite the fact that the illustrations were all aligned.
Yes.
Um, and so I started like kind of like building guidelines for the whole team and sort of like doing the work of like a technical director, like just like
Yes.
uniformizing everything.
Yes.
And in the beginning, at first, I was hated for it. Like
Yeah.
people weren't happy. Um,
Yes.
but ultimately, when everybody realized that I wasn't doing this because I wanted to look smart, I was
Yeah.
doing it because I cared and I wanted
Mm-hmm.
our work to look like really good for everybody. Um, and it was making everybody's lives like easier too. So,
Yes.
um, and so, and even like the art director at the beginning, like saw it like, oh, like this is like this person is taking too much space in the room.
Yes.
And but at some point, like when she realized the value that this was bringing to the project, like her approach like shifted completely. And then it was
Right.
like, no, okay, like let's having in the conversations when we want to do this, this, and this, and this, so we know we can plan technically ahead and everybody's aligned on that. And
Right.
ultimately, that made the project better.
Right.
Was I paid or hired as a technical director?
No.
No, but that's what I
No.
did. Um,
Yep.
and the second thing is, and we've worked on for this client, you and I, on a project together. Um, there's also those clients where you start like you said, like honing those little things that will make it ultimately better. And then there's like all these guidelines that sit on top of like these big companies. It's like, oh no, like this, we cannot touch this. This should be this and that and that. And you go like, and internally you go like, man, that's gonna look so much worse. But then that's how it
Yeah.
is. It's like you have to
Yes.
live with it and kind of like build around that thing that cannot be moved. So
Yeah.
like the wrapping is beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. To that point specifically, that I think that goes back to the balance. You're wanting to be an artist and inject your art and voice, and then you're met with specific boundaries, usually or very common with more high profile clients. They have more rules and more specifications, and you got to turn your designer brain on because there's a way to make it work, frankly. But you got to be able to play instead of just fight. If you're only willing to fight it, everyone's gonna end up upset. The artist because they weren't allowed to express, and the client because they didn't feel accepted. They felt like you were butting heads with them the whole time. And that'll change depending on who you're working with. And it's like you learn that through experience. You can't just jump in and be good at that, or at least I couldn't. And to your first point, I remember that happening frequently, especially early on, because again, you enter the market and then you're labeled immediately. And that label falls short of all of your what might be other strengths. So for you, it was I actually am particularly good at organizing. And if we exercise this level of organization project wide, we're going to have an easier time within the project. And you recognized where leadership on that specific project was falling short. And you said, let me take the initiative here and execute. And for them to eventually accept you, I think says a lot about how you presented it, because it's very easy when you're supposed to be tiny little animator to overstep and then get fired. And you didn't get fired. You might have been like butting heads, but eventually they recognized there's a good intention here and this will have a lasting positive effect. But a lot of that's in the presentation. So it's like if I'm hired early on as animator, but I'm seeing that there's room to improve in the art direction or the illustration, I would do that. I would go, yes, I did that shot you assigned me. And then I also did this thing for an extra few hours. Check it out. I don't know. It felt like it's cool and it might fit and take it or leave it. But like, of course, I'm not forcing it. And 9 times out of 10, they'd go like, whoa, this is way cool. And if it doesn't fit immediately into the project, then we want to like keep it for something else. And like I would get more calls. But you don't just like, it's about doing the work. and doing it with good intention and presenting it appropriately, and then hopefully that like pays out down the line. But be very careful. Yeah.
No, no, for sure. Like, like I always say, you direct too, so you know this perfectly. Like directing is, I would say 50% is communication. It's like talking to people, how you talk to like your team, how you talk to the client, to the agency, how you articulate ideas. When
Yeah.
something is kind of like hogging things down, like how you unclog the thing by, like
Yeah.
massaging over here and then like compromising over there. And it's all of that. And certainly
Yes.
for this project I was mentioning, like I was very cautious on how I brought that in. I think
Yes.
like the people were not happy because mostly everybody were doing their things in their own corners
Yeah.
and doing their own soup. And then
Yes.
like and then of course as an artist, if you're kind of like young and you have some ego, um
Yeah.
or you maybe let's not say ego, but maybe you mistake somebody that's trying to help you. You take it like as like they're criticizing. This is happens a lot with juniors, like or even mediors. It's like they take it personally when in fact it has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with you. It's just about the work.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the reaction was mostly that. It's like, oh, but I've been cooking this way. I don't want to cook differently.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in the end, it's like, dude, we're making this like party, and there's going to be all these dishes, and when people
Yeah.
they're gonna eat them, they all need to taste good together. It's like
Uh-huh.
you cannot go like fish soup and then suddenly candies and then
Yeah.
suddenly like
Yeah.
cake and then like orange juice. Like, dude, like your mouth is gonna explode. So this is kind of like the same. Everything
Yeah.
needs to be aligned. And
Yeah.
at some point when you are in a work, like you're working in a team of like, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 animators, you need to have guidelines. I mean, you need to
Yeah.
be organized because otherwise it's pure chaos.
I agree, absolutely. And just on that point, as a director, it does fall on their like direct responsibility to make sure the project is organized. But a competent director, I think, would be okay delegating that responsibility should somebody speak up and offer, we can do it this way and it might be better. And you go like, let me sit with it and think on it. And then you realize, yes. And then you realize that's going to make your life easier so that you can focus on the other aspects of the project. And then you go like, please. And this has happened with me many, many times. I don't claim to be the best at everything a director needs to be doing, but I've had the pleasure of bringing on very talented artists I would suggest are better than even I am. And they oftentimes don't just bring technical expertise, like they knock their shots out in a way I could have never. Often they'll also bring other competent skills, like, hey, I can lead the rest of the 2D animators because I've done that before. And if you feel like are you okay with it? And yeah. So now we have a sub team under the direction where it's like a 2D animation team where they're reporting directly to this artist that offered that. Absolutely, please do it. Another artist, here's some technical suggestions that might help make the pipeline through simpler, or we could package this up and use it as a toolkit in all the other shots. Okay, now I have a technical lead. Yes, sir. Like, bring you in and like, let's figure out how to make sure we're being consistent. I think that's what a competent director would do when those things provide. Now, they don't always. Sometimes you have a team that just does what they're asked. And then it's not your job to force things on people that aren't comfortable with, or it isn't their skill set. Then you operate in that way. So again, it's more of like a balance, I'd say.
No, yeah, I 100% agree. And something I always say, when I'm working with a team is like, there's going to be spaces where you are invited, welcomed, and encouraged to express yourself. And like you said, like no one has the monopoly of good ideas.
Yes.
No one has. So
Yes.
So there might be other spots where the director has a very specific idea on what he wants, and you will have on that spot maybe less freedom.
Uh-huh.
You know, it's like give and take. You know, it's like here you can go wild and like bring on all your ideas you have. Here, because there's always reasons behind like why things need to be in a certain way also.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
the message, the delivery, like the vision of, because this ties with this shot in this way with this movement. So you might have freedom on the animation, maybe less on the visuals, or the other way around. But again, that's very organic, and very often doing projects like this, like even I would say an evolution in the style, because everybody brings their like the little grain of salt, you know, that like
Yes.
spices up the thing, and you go like, okay, I hadn't seen the motion, I hadn't imagined emotion like that, but what you did is like way better than what I had
Oh
imagined.
yeah. Yes.
Like just things like how many is like, dude, that's just give me more.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I don't know if you want to keep going on this point. I could, or if you want to pivot, that's totally up to
No,
you.
I was gonna pivot on something
Okay.
like radically different.
Okay.
Just to
Let's pivot.
destabilize a little bit the thing. You used to live in the West Coast, right?
Yeah.
And
Seattle
then,
area.
yeah, Seattle area, and then you
Mhm.
moved more inner country.
Mm-hmm.
You will see why I'm asking you that question. But like,
Sure.
why did you took that decision?
We had a bunch of kids. It's more personal than professional. I knew that I was lucky enough to work wherever really I wanted. I came up in a non like animation hub. I wasn't in one of the main hubs. I wasn't boots on the ground going into studio very often. I did do that a bit early. And then I sort of figured out a way to competently execute sort of out of my own studios. So with that freedom, I knew that I could succeed kind of anywhere I wanted to go. So I wasn't tied to that consideration really. And then just family stuff. We had a bunch of kids. Our family moved out of the Seattle area. And we had the choice to feel more siloed or go with them and take the leap. And we decided to take the leap. I love the Pacific Northwest. I was raised there. It still feels like home. So last year we went to Boston, which is on the East Coast, but there were so many similarities. New Hampshire, Boston area, very rich with dense forest, and it was more moist and wet. And just stepping out of the plane, I just was like, oh yeah, this feels like home, because it's where it's the environment that I was used to growing up. But we've landed in a deserty southern Utah area, following family, and it's beautiful. It's there's a lot of great kind of touristy sort of beautiful landscapes out here as well, just like polar opposite. But it's been nice to be in the sun every day. It rarely rains. I grew up skateboarding, so whenever I got a sunny day growing up, it was like sent from the heavens above. I just thank the Lord that I ever got sun. So it's been a huge contrast there. And yeah, we don't know if we'll be here forever, but for now, we're really happy. It's a great place for families. And again, we have our family here, so there's a lot of additional support, which is it's just been really helpful for us.
Yeah, which brings me to family, because again, we've never spoke about this, like you and I personally, but I'm good at reading the room, and I kind of like reading your socials. I can kind of like measure how family is important to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how it has been for you a support for what you do. And so
Yes.
I'm interested, like, if you could elaborate more on that. And I would say why, because currently I feel this a lot with the people that are like reaching me out after watching the podcast, asking me questions. Like a lot of people are feeling very isolated.
Yeah. Yes.
Despite maybe being with their like close family, which is maybe wife and kid, they are still feeling very, very isolated, and especially in this remote work life we're having more and more.
Yeah.
So I was interesting to have your vision on that, like on how your family has been. Like, I'm missing the word in English. I have the thing in French in my head, but
Sure.
we say la pierre angulaire. It's like the cornerstone, the angular stone to kind of like things that support your
Yes.
actions further.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Listen, I mean, to me, it's foundational. To me, my family provides my purpose equal or more so than my work and my drive. And I grew up that way. I had a really tight family growing up. My parents, they're still together. I've got siblings. I talk and communicate and support each other constantly. And this, I've learned, is somewhat rare. So I'm like unbelievably sort of appreciative that was my coming up. That was how I developed. And so moving into my adult life, I had kids early. I got married really early, and then we had kids a few years after we got married because it's just something that we prioritized. And it's been, it literally just provides purpose for me. That's the simplest way to put it. And there are times of isolation. I can certainly relate to that feeling. I'm somebody that has worked solo for almost 10 years now. And many of my days are defined by sitting at a desk with nobody in my close proximity. Now I have freedom in other ways. I can literally stand up and go skateboard in my warehouse and like get out frustrations or whatever that way. But I can't stand up and go talk to a coworker and like collaborate. So there's gives and takes. If there's one thing I would say about my actual location, if we were to move, which would be representative of shifting priorities, because we would be leaving family behind in order to maybe get something else, it would probably be closer proximity to similar-minded people, whether that be industry folks or other artists. Because there have been times, certainly, where I felt that void, but it's not something that is pervasive, and it's not something that completely colors my mental state. It might come and go, but it can be subsidized with online communications, jumping on here with podcasts with you, but I'm also in other groups of artists and like-minded folks digitally. And that's been very valuable as well. And I'm thankful that we have kind of the means to connect so easily. Because there are just times where it's like, there's something going on in my head that only an industry friend would understand. And there's hard times too. Last year, mentally was pretty hard for me. And then the year before last was financially pretty hard for me. And like, there's only so much my family understands or et cetera. And I can elaborate and articulate until the day's end, but that doesn't translate entirely into like a deeper emotional understanding in the same way that experience does. So I got on the phone last year. I just prioritized in December, especially like calling friends that I've missed or haven't talked to in a while and having an hour or 2 hour conversation. And like, that was very lifting for me because I found an understanding like almost immediately. So yeah.
No, it's funny because you mentioned that specifically because this person I was talking to, we don't know each other. I just like messaged him for something very specific, and I guess I pushed like kind of like the right buttons with my questions or the way I wrote, because then it unleashed the whole conversation. And he
Yes.
was like, and he was literally telling me like, yeah, I don't know why I'm telling you all of this, but
Sure.
but uh, but uh, but
Yep.
it feels good. It feels good to do it. And I was like, man,
Yes.
like first of all, if it makes you feel better, then just keep going. And
Yeah.
secondly, maybe it's because, like you said, you're talking with somebody that understands fully
Yeah.
what you're
Yeah.
going through.
Yes.
Um, and it was very interesting because the more he talked, I told him like, it's like everything you're saying is like I'm looking at myself in a mirror. Like
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
identify with every single thing you just
Hmm.
listed there, and you've been like mentioning. Um,
Hmm.
and that's one of the reasons I also do these podcasts. It's because
Yeah.
like people will look at your website, your work, and who would imagine if they stay at that mentally last year was hard for you,
Right.
or that the year before financially was hard for you.
Right.
Like,
Right.
and I think it's again, social media tends to um erase all of that, because
Yes.
that's not the sexy part, that's not the
Yep.
part that sells. So all of that gets like under the carpet, but
Hmm.
the damage and the trauma and it's still there.
Yeah.
um and so I think it's important for people like to also see that, like, even I would say successful
Yeah.
artists in our field go through these things.
Hmm.
um and it's something we also discussed with PJ from Laundry,
Hmm.
where he also had like some very harsh moments.
Hmm.
But if you don't ask, if you don't have a conversation,
Yeah. Yeah.
nobody knows. and
Yes.
and um and I think it's been like pretty brutal, like mentally speaking, for everybody, seeing this constant feed of like success, you know making you literally feel like shit, because
Hmm. Yeah.
you go like, okay, like how these guys keep on like outputting this, and like this, there's so much talent in the world, and all these things that can literally crush you.
Yes. Absolutely.
um and
Yeah.
and even like with I'm older than you, I think, but like even with my age, knowing all of this, sometimes it still does affect you. You can
Yeah.
still like even if you rationalize everything, you can still go like, man, today I'm feeling like shit, like because of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. I just said on my story yesterday on Instagram, like, listen, guys, right now I'm feeling really good and I want to put that positivity out. But this comes on the back end of like a mental slump that just totally snuck up on me. I don't know necessarily where it came from. I think it came from many different angles, and I didn't anticipate it, and it hit me hard, and it took me down for a while. And like, I'm focusing now and trying my best to get out of it, but it takes work. It doesn't just shift around and like it'll sneak up on you. It just will. And then it'll hit you and you got to work your way through it. And like, I'm personally thankful for the highs and the highs. And then there's also lows. And like, if I can only operate in a high, what's kind of the point? Because when a low comes, if I'm completely disabled, like I don't feel very competent in that way. And so like I'm appreciative of the lows because it redefines the highs and vice versa. Um, and it's like invaluable to be able to, you mentioned you were having a direct message conversation with somebody you didn't necessarily know personally, but you struck a chord immediately. And I relate to that, of course, as well. It's like, I'm it's valuable in a way that's almost indescribable to be able to relate so instantly to somebody else that might be having a similar experience. And that doesn't mean it's everybody. I think motion design tends to have this problem of like everybody individually can relate to everybody else individually. That's not necessarily true. Generally speaking, it is true, but one to one, personally vulnerable, sometimes you need to be able to identify who it is that directly relates to me, Reece Parker, and this other person. Like, oh my God, thank you so much for this conversation. Versus if a student's asking me a question, like, I'd love to respond and be thoughtful to you, but it's not going to necessarily afford me the same value that it's affording that student. But I can find those direct peers and have that. I don't know. I'm just kind of rambling now, but I think, very relatable what you were saying.
No, I mean, it wasn't rambling. It was pretty, like you said, like you cannot like have hooks with everybody. You know,
right.
you can have like thoughtful and deep conversations, but like the ones that will really cut deep, those are fewer.
Yes.
And I would say like identify those people and keep them close,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
not only I feel they can understand, but it's like by sometimes like pushing those buttons that you didn't even knew that existed. Like
Absolutely.
it unlocks things you didn't knew were kind of like trapped inside. Um, like
Yeah.
I you know, like I you mentioned like you called people, talked for 2 hours and everything. Um, I value a lot being in person. Not especially for work, but like when I spend time with somebody. Of course, if there's an ocean between us, because now I'm in Europe, for example, my family is in South America.
Uh-huh.
There's no other way than do it digitally, of course. But if I
Yeah.
can be in person, I will do it.
Mhm.
And I remember kind of like years ago, one of the times when I flew back to my country, and that wasn't the reason of my trip. I went there because my grandmother was very ill, and it was at the time I thought it was probably last time I would see her, and it was in
Yeah.
fact the last one I saw her. So it was a way of like also saying goodbye. Um,
Yeah.
and I ended up like what I call like closing circles, a lot of
Yeah.
circles. It's like
Yeah.
things that like are unfinished,
Mhm.
and there are. It's like you're carrying a backpack full of stones, and you
Mhm.
keep adding stones, and sometimes you have to lose some weight because you cannot keep
Mhm.
on walking eternally with adding more and more stones. And
Yeah.
so and I ended up like just casually just bumping on into people I hadn't seen for a very, very, very long time, and having like suddenly conversations that unlocked stuff that I didn't even was aware that was still in me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
and so and I think like having people that have that effect on you is important,
Mhm.
because it's not a matter of like questioning you or telling you, oh, this right. It's nothing to do with that. It's just like from something that has is not all related with the thing. Suddenly it opens a door, and you were like,
Mhm.
fuck, there was a door there. Like,
Mhm.
where does
Yeah.
this lead? And then when you go, there's like, shit, okay, this is going to be hard, but like better get it out. It's like,
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, the more that we expose ourselves to other people's perspectives, I mean, we're only really capable of seeing exactly how our brains are kind of telling us to see, and that's great, and that guides us through life. But the more isolated we tend to be, and walled off from other perspectives, I think the crazier we can get, or more confused, or more something. Generally negative. So I think what you're saying, or at least how I'm interpreting it, is you don't. It's not like a prescription. You're not told to go and have these experiences. They're more so like they happened, and I ran into this other person, and they so happened to have a shared understanding or a new perspective or something that made me realize something or look at something in a slightly different way, which maybe has a profound effect. Again, there's value that you cannot describe or articulate in those experiences, but it's dependent on our ability to kind of see them and be open to them.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is like because there's people that are socially kind of like like fleeing away of that to that, and I would say like just don't because of course it's hard, like like confront yourself to something that kind of like questions your vision or your feelings on certain
Right.
things can
Right.
be challenging. But the more you do it, like the more you embrace the diversity and the fact that we are imperfect creatures.
Yeah.
That's what makes the beauty of us.
Yes.
I think that's like when I look at, for example, going back to art now, it's like when I look at your style, you know, with without knowing you, without having like before this conversation, I could already kind of like not everything, of course, because I don't really know you enough,
Yeah.
but I could see a lot of those threads already running in there, like
Yeah.
of the stuff you shared of like your past and drawing and skateboarding and influences
Yeah.
and your attitude towards things and this approach. And I was already kind of like reading those things, but I'm only able to do that because through
Right.
time, I learned to like paying attention, to be open
Yes.
to those things. If you're not open to that, you will still be like, like just narrow minded, just looking in front of you.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. For you to be able to go to my website, which is a distilled, presented version of my personality, and to be able to dissect it and understand parts of who I am based on that, it's also indicative of your ability to observe and understand. And there's many people that have nothing to do with art that would go to my site and just go like, I don't get it. I don't necessarily appreciate it. And that's okay too. But there's a level of similarity that's just not there. You understand? So if I can talk to another artist and we can observe each other's work and we can have appreciation for each other just based on our output in similar but separate individual experiences creating art. Now all of a sudden we know like what it took to get that result, and there's something there that we can talk about and get into, which is interesting.
You know that in the past podcast, I interviewed Ariel Costa, Bling My Brain, and he was saying like, yeah, like when people come to my website, like it's not for everybody. Like
Yeah.
I get it, but at least the ones that go to my website or like they come to me, they know what they get, what they are gonna get. It's like like
Yeah.
they come for me for this
Yeah.
for this recipe, not something else.
Yeah.
And I think kind of you're kind of in the same vibe in a sense like, okay, this is who I am. This is what I do.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
if you like it, then great. Let's do cool stuff together. If you don't,
Yes.
well, I can't do
Yes.
anything for you. It's like,
I
um,
appreciate even being considered in the same light as Ariel, because I think he's more fearless than I am, frankly, and I think he deserves credit for that. Yeah.
I mean, the funny thing is, again, from looking at his work, and his style and everything, and then the goofy characters and the funny things, like, I was like, dude, like, isn't this like a way to express through animation, like what you publicly kind of do because maybe you're shy? It was like, man, that's totally that. It's like
Interesting.
I'm a super shy guy. Like
Interesting.
I wish I could do what my characters do, but I would never dare to do that. It's like, and so it was like this paradox of like being a super shy
Yeah.
person in public, and even like he doesn't like to be surrounded of too many people.
Yeah.
And then like when you look at his art, like so colorful and textures and vibrancy, and the characters doing so much crazy stuff, like
Yeah.
it's kind of like the inner Eden, like what's the treasure inside kind of like
Yes.
opening.
Well, thank God he found a way to express it, because it's beautiful and
Yeah,
and
of
we
course.
can all appreciate it, Yeah.
Man, it's already 1 hour 10, so I will slowly start landing the plane. With like two final, like it's one question, but like split in two aspects. One technical and one more, let's say, carte blanche, for you to kind of like rumble and express what's on your mind. So my question is about the future, and so twofold. So technically, you've been experienced, like you've been part of the development of Time Lord. You've worked a lot with Procreate. What's in your mind now for the future? What's kind of like tickling you or exciting you in the future with the tools and the technical aspect of our craft and your craft? So that's the technical aspect of the question. And then you have the more like open-ended question where you can talk more about like personal goals, development, work, whatever you feel to.
Yeah, good question. I'd say tools wise, I'm not really defined by technical skills. So I had somebody early in my career ask me, like, where my leaning was, how I tend to operate, and I didn't know how to understand or to articulate it. And I said, I'm not really a tools guy. When I have an idea, I'll figure out how to execute it in the way that I saw it in my brain, and I don't care necessarily where I'm doing it. And he said to me very clearly, he said, "Oh, you work intuitively." And I was like, that blew my mind. I just didn't know how to describe it so like matter of fact. And then I identified with that ever since. And so there's a landscape of new whatever's coming at us, especially in the kind of AI sphere. Are these going to be used as tools? Are they going to be used to replace us? I battle with that a lot in the last few years, and I'm sort of done battling with it. And where I've landed is like, I've been so obsessed with trying to understand where the future is heading. It got in the way of my ability to be productive almost entirely. I look back at 2024, personal work especially. Of course, I was executing on client work in the way I best knew how. But outside of that, I really felt a void looking back in my personal progression and in my, what was I doing outside of paid work? Almost nothing. And then I compared that to my first year in the industry, like 2016-ish, where it was defined entirely by personal work and collaborations with other artists. And again, just having an idea and then figuring out where it makes sense to execute it. And I was like, I need to go back to that. I need to stop looking forward. I'm tired of that. It's ruining my relationship with my work, frankly. I need to stop, and I need to go back to where I was in 2016, where I didn't care about where the right answer was. I cared about nothing but doing what was in my brain and getting it out onto my computer. And that was fruitful for literally 10 years almost. It was like that attitude and that energy is what has supported my ability to grow as an artist. And tech specs are going to change. They're going to change more rapidly than we've ever experienced before. What can I do about it? I can't learn everything. I'm sorry. I can't.
Yeah,
I can try, but we can't. What we can do is we can continue to love what it is we are doing and adapt what it is that makes sense and is going to help us, and leave the rest that's just going to get in our way. And I would caution, other artists that are struggling. I know we all are. Frankly speaking, we are all struggling with this right now. But I've had a shift in mindset, and I really started implementing it January of this year. This is very new, where I'm like, I'm not playing this stupid game anymore. If this wants to outrun me or replace me eventually, I cannot control that. What I can control is how much I still love the work. And if I still love the work, I should be doing the work when I have the time to do it. And I should be excited about it and not drained every time I sit down to do something personal, if I'm having this kind of an attitude, then it's like, just hang it up and do something else. That's how I feel. So I'm being very blunt with myself about it. And it's really, really helped a lot. I feel better now than I've probably felt in the last few years, honestly. And it has nothing really to do with the opportunities that are coming. I was too tied to that. I was too tied to abundance of opportunity and that giving me a reason to do the work. And I think that's not how it should be. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it's
yeah.
Don't worry. It's like I wasn't expecting anything in particular. It's like I think your answer is interesting because you brought in like again something that was like a conundrum you had inside of you. And please know that you're not alone because I've felt the same. Again, this topic of like relevance, relevant doesn't mean like, oh, I want like likes on social media. It's like it says like, what is the future gonna be made of? Like, is the work I'm doing now, like, because we've invested a lot of years training ourselves, like honing a craft, like into what I'm doing today, still gonna be relevant in 2 years, or am I gonna be, like, I don't know, doing I'm gonna be a plumber, because art is fucking gone. We ultimately we don't know. But like you said, like if you get stuck in that loop, it completely paralyzes you.
Yes.
And I would say, and that's what we were evoking like earlier on the podcast, is this thing that even if you rationalize that in your head, you're conscious that all of this is the system and blah 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 blah. Even then, at some point, it hits you in the back, and you go like, "Shit."
Yeah.
Oh, you're like, this is tough. And you have to find a way to get on your legs. Like somebody reached me on LinkedIn recently. We've been having a conversation, and he was telling me like he was having a hard time finding work, and so he was going to have to find like an alternative job to like pay the bills, which is not maybe nothing related with art or motion. And I was like, dude, like no job is beneath us.
Yeah.
Like if that's what you have to do now to pay the bills and put food in the plate and sustain your family, that's what you have to do. And
I agree.
and nobody, I mean, I'm not going to judge you for that because I've been in that situation, and that's what you do as a human being. You are surviving. And I hope that opportunities in motion design and the industry you want to perform into will come to you later. Like we are in a weird moment right now where so much stuff is like shifting around the world. There's so much like insecurities, like financially in the markets, like politically everywhere. That it's like a weird moment, and everything is like house cards right now, sort of. So, and I was like, so dude, like don't feel you're less because of that. You're not.
Right.
And like you said, like maybe tomorrow we will all be working at Starbucks, because I don't know.
Yeah. I agree entirely, and I think that was part of my path, maybe out of my mental slump, was simplifying things around me, and just going like, all these nice, fancy, expensive things that I've surrounded myself with as a result of my perceived success in this art form aren't guaranteed. And I've enjoyed I've enjoyed the opportunities that I've had, but if my perspective has entirely shifted out of just loving the work, which is what it was that was the foundation of any of this success in the first place, then I've lost my path. And in theory, I should still be doing this work, even if I have to sell my house and I have to lose my things and I have to relocate into something else and I have to get another job. If I love this work, even in that situation, I would still be doing it. And I think that there's value in that. And I think that there's intention in that. And, re-injecting that love and intention has been my only path to getting clients in the first place anyways. So it's subconscious. It's not necessarily linear. It's just something that you can feel. And I just had a recent call with a big client that said, your new website was the reason we're calling you now. And I was like, well, I spent a year painstakingly making that site. And if I would have told anybody, even my direct peers, why I was doing it, I wouldn't have a real reason. Just like, I'm doing it because I absolutely love doing it, and it makes me happy. And outside of that, if it never ever comes back in any way that makes any sense other than I spent a bunch of money on this site, I'm still proud of it. But it turns out not much long later, there's big clients, multiple clients have come, but one particularly bigger one as a result of that love that I put into this side project that doesn't necessarily have anything directly related to my main or core services. That is my formula. So when students ask me, I tell them exactly that. Love the work you're doing to death, and I want to see it in the details that you put into it. And if I can't see it, then, that means maybe you could spend some more time honing your eye for where things are and where they're not. And how you're presenting your work. You got to care. You got to love it. And I think that comes back to us. But again, circling to your original point, we cannot control the future of this industry. That's not my responsibility, nor is it yours, nor is it students. It's going to ebb and flow as it needs to ebb and flow. And, knowing that we can't control it, it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to be worrying about how it's going to exactly unfold. It only really gets us into a mental trap, I think.
Before we wrap it, I want to bounce on something you just said. When you said love what you do and train your eye, I would like to add something to that. Mm-hmm. Is that the things we do are imperfect. Mm-hmm. And I think we can put so much love in so many details. But don't get paralyzed also because you want to be pouring that love in too many things, in too many details. I've seen pieces that I would say technically would be considered by some as not good enough because the shaders or whatever, the love that was put on the story and the narrative and the message was so good that I like that, at least for me, all those imperfections would completely fade away.
Right. It makes up for it.
Yeah. And so I would say if you're alone and doing these things, put the love where you're good at, and that will shine. Don't if you're not a zebra sculptor, if you're doing 3D animation, for example, and you're not a zebra sculptor, don't try to be one. Sure, your 3D model is not going to look as realistic or as this or that. It doesn't matter because in the end, it's the story, the pacing, the edit, the thing works out well. Look at Flow now. Mm-hmm. The Blender animated project that is nominated, and something that I saw that blew my mind is the guy sharing that most of the problems he was solving, he solved that through shaders. Like he wasn't even like tweaking lighting. He's like, oh, do I need a highlight here? Like he was doing it in the shader. Like, okay, let me add a circle here, blah, blah, blah. And then because he rendered everything in Eevee. So like he wanted this to render on his computer at home, like no render farm. And like, and I was like, that's like, again, people will look at Flow and you go like, oh, it doesn't look as good as Pixar. But of course it doesn't. Like, that's not the same budget. That's not the same team. That's like, it's not all the same thing. And still, like, story-wise, it's there.
Yes.
And there's not a word. It's like, it's a no dialogue film.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I agree. And I think that's a really good point. And I think it requires all of us as individual artists to be aware of where our strengths are and where they're not, and be careful to not paralyze ourselves because we want to execute on every detail in every role where it might not actually be fruitful in the end product. So if your narrative outweighs your technical ability, that's okay. Your story still shines, and we can tell where you did put the love, right? There's still love that we can discern and we can feel. And I think that's more the point of my message than it is every single detail is important. There's a balance. And just as we were talking about really this entire conversation, different points, there's a balance. And you have to be self-aware and observant and understand where's the best place to put your time and where are your strengths and where can you grow in those areas, and be okay with other people being good at other things. And it's not easy necessarily, but it's valuable to kind of look and try to assess ourselves and act appropriately.
Well, Reece, I think it was a nice way to wrap it up. So thank you for your time. Thanks for being with me. And anytime.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It was really, really a good conversation. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you.